So each of us, God inherently instills that desire for more, that desire for adventure, that longing to be fulfilled in each of us. And we spend our entire life trying to fill that gap. And so, because we don't find it in the ordinary, we try to go outside of our typical life to adventure, to try to find and fulfill this desire for more.
Welcome to the Blood Brothers podcast with Ben Steiger and Eric Metz. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing our longing for adventure that God places in our hearts and the different ways that we can fill that desire in constructive ways that will lead to peace, freedom, and fulfillment. So, Ben, good to see you again today. How are you doing today?
Hey, man, good to see you. I am great. Had an early morning meeting with some dudes that love me, love this ministry, and love each other. And it was some board members, but it wasn't about board items or this ministry. It was about just connecting as brothers. And goodness, man, I just love that time. This one doesn't have a big agenda. It's just, man, being friends and cultivating, those deeper relationships and what's going on in each other's lives and families. And then as I came in the office this morning, just spent some time getting ready for this podcast. Excited. This is one of my favorite subjects, and love talking about some adventure. So, yeah, man. How are you?
Doing well. Yeah, excited. Life's an adventure in and of itself, isn't it? I mean, it's ups and downs.
Absolutely.
And sometimes things come across your plate you do not expect to happen. And, we have to take it and, again, surrender things to the Lord as we walk through this adventure we call life. So
You got it.
yeah.
You got it.
So what do you think of when you think of adventure? Like, what comes to mind for you, Ben?
Well, Eric, as we know, adventure can come across to individuals in different ways, but the definition of adventure is an unusual and exciting, typically hazardous experience or activity. And, you can hear people talk about, adventures in the outdoors. You can hear people talk about athletics and adventures in business, adventures in what you eat, adventures in different lifestyles, and good, bad, and different. There's all kinds of adventures out there, but for me, the greatest way I think of adventure, I think of my marriage as adventure. I think of parenting as adventure, different aspects of what I do in ministry and day-to-day things. But the greatest definition for me revolves around the outdoors. And man, I love getting out in God's creation where things are not inside of my control. And the reality is, things are never really inside of our control, but there's an element when we get outside of the unknown that, man, just really presses into my heart in regards to adventure. And I have something I want to share further about that before we go on to the next question, but I want to hear from you. What comes to mind for you when you think of adventure?
Yeah. I didn't really grow up. I grew up outside, but not in the outdoors, if that makes sense. My outside was all sports and baseball and football and basketball.
Right.
Those are where we lived, ate, breathed. My brothers and I were just constantly outside, and that was our thing.
Typically hazardous, exciting, and an activity, right? That's an adventure.
Yeah. And there's just such a thrill that comes from, being successful at a sport, or, scoring a touchdown, or catching a ball, or, scoring a 3-pointer, or whatever the case may be. It's that thrill and that joy and excitement of, and I think some of it has to do with using your talents and abilities as well. So there's a connection there as far as,
Absolutely.
That synergy of what am I good at and what brings me life and excitement and joy. And it can be hazardous at times as well. So, but yeah, for me, sports, but even now, as I'm older and not as physically able to play in all these different sports, business, just trying to, in my current role, teach and train people to learn our tools well and be successful and help other people be successful is exciting and adventurous too. And so, I'd say the business world now is somewhat of that adventure that I look forward to. So,
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's
Yeah, you said
cool.
you're going to share something. What are you going to
Yeah,
what are you
man.
planning
I
on
figure we
sharing?
just dive in and cut to the chase with adventure. Real quick, I want to tell a story though. So, man, I love leading others into adventure, men, women, couples, whatever. But my dominant focus is on the heart of men. And one of the things I love doing is going out west on adventures, as I've shared many times, on this podcast. But man, I think it was back in 2017. I took a group of, I don't know, maybe there's six, seven, maybe eight dudes to the Idaho backcountry, and we were taking them elk hunting. And we were filming this for a Badlands Film Festival, and we had different teams inside of it. But all these guys had never done anything like this. We took our backpacks, loaded it up with all the gear that we needed for a week, and just took off miles into the backcountry. And we were chasing elk. We were camping in the middle of nowhere, filtering water from streams and cooking freeze dried meals and eating beef jerky and that kind of deal, from mountain hailstorms, thunder and lightning and snow, from ups and downs of physical exhaustion and injury, from life threatening, man, when are we going to call the helicopter kind of conversations, to man, just joy of God speaking to our hearts. But this adventure was captured and presented in the film fest, and the title of the film was called More. And I want to read to you part of my script from that film that, when I was thinking about this podcast, just came to mind, and I wrote it down word for word. I'm just going to read it if you don't mind. In our fast paced, self indulgent, selfie taken society, there may be no better way to bring focus to the craziness of life than through raw adventure. You see, we all desire the same thing: more challenge, more meaning, more purpose. The desire for more exists within all of us, and for many, adventure rapidly brings these desires to the forefront and into focus. This may be the very reason that we seek adventure. Our lives can be defined as an expedition in pursuit of fulfillment. We have climbed the mountains, fished the streams, hiked the hills, and have swum the seas, all in an effort to acquire the elusive trophy of fulfillment. All of our attempts have ended in dissatisfaction. The desire for more is still burning. So each of us, God inherently instills that desire for more, that desire for adventure, that longing to be fulfilled in each of us. And we spend our entire life trying to fill that gap. And so, because we don't find it in the ordinary, we try to go outside of our typical life to adventure, to try to find and fulfill this desire for more. And Eric, how I share the definition of that desire for more, but I'm curious how you would define that desire for more, for our listeners to relate to.
Yeah. I think the God-sized hole that's in our heart naturally creates that for everybody of there's more to this life than just the going to work every day, making money to pay for the food and whatever, just the day to day, and that desire for more. And I think God puts that in us to call us out of the norm, call us out to not only be with him and have a adventurous relationship with him, but also to exercise the creativity he's placed in us. And I don't want to over spiritualize it either, because I feel like there's just an element of, man, when I go out, and I'll speak back in the day when I was able to, but when I would get ready for a football game and I'd be out on the field and the adrenaline's rushing and you catch a pass or you score, I mean, that aliveness that comes from there, that success and that joy and that fulfillment of doing something constructive that's good and not harmful in any way, that is that craving that we all have. And I feel like he puts it in there for us to live life. He came for us to have an abundant life. And that word
Yeah.
abundant, I think, covers so many different areas. It's not just, salvation. I think it's an abundant life to be with your kids and to exercise the abilities and talents that he's given you in creative ways to express whatever. It could be, if you're an artist, maybe it's developing a painting that's amazing. And so it could be in multiple different ways, but we come alive when we exercise those things in very constructive, healthy ways. And when I think of that, I think of that God-sized hole that He puts in our hearts on
Yeah,
purpose to go seek out those things.
man. Yeah, I love that. You
Yeah,
you said not to over spiritualize it, right? And not yeah, I think we say that every now and then, but you and I both believe that everything wraps around, our relationship with Christ, right?
correct.
And, everything you said has to do with our spiritual nature, and,
Yeah, that's true.
this pursuit that God has for our heart to draw us to Him, to bring us closer to Him. Yes, He loves us and He gives us the ability to enjoy, to appreciate, to fully embrace aspects of our life, from the ability to smell and see and touch, the ability to experience, excitement and adrenaline and dopamine and all those things that come from living on the edge, at times. But, the older I get, the more and more I recognize that desire, which, manifests itself oftentimes with a desire to win, a desire to compete, a desire to be the best, a desire to live on the edge and experience thrills and danger. Man, I now recognize, that desire just as an opportunity that the Father wants to use to speak to my heart. I used to go elk hunting or on these adventures with a specific target. Like I went elk hunting to kill an elk. And some of it wasn't about getting the meat. Some of it was about being able to prove to everybody else, look at me, look at what I can do. But years and
Yeah,
years in, after many failures, I recognized that elk hunting for me wasn't at all about really harvesting an elk, but it was about experiencing what God wanted to speak to my heart, from stripping away the noise and the craziness of life. When I think about competing, whether it's back when I played football or basketball or whatever, or it's playing ping pong or volleyball or whatever nowadays, is it my desire to win, or is it my desire to be present and to appreciate, man, just this process and seeing others work through this process? But man, I completely agree, that God has given this as a gift, but He's also given it this desire for adventure as a lure, as a
hmm
way to
yeah,
cut to our heart.
yeah. When I mean over spiritualized, I'm not saying that God's not a part of all that we do and
Right,
integrated in
right,
this, because again, He's our creator. He's the one that created that desire, and He's the one that we need to cultivate that intimacy with. I think when I was thinking of over spiritualized, it's like you're always, I don't know, going about it in a way where you're like being weird or over religious or
right.
kind of like,
Yeah, yeah.
like awkward, showy crap that I think can't stand.
I know.
But it is
Right.
about a relationship where you're aware of Him, and you're aware of Him. You're praying through in your head throughout that process. Can't tell you how many times I was praying in football I wouldn't die, but also just having Him
Right.
with me and experiencing things with Him as our Father. So I guess that's more of what I meant on the
Yeah.
not over
No, I get it.
spiritualizing stuff. So
I get it. One of the questions that we had was, how does God fit into this desire, that we have for adventure? And so, from an athletic perspective, what's kind of been this process that God has stripped away the carnal Eric, that desire to win, that desire to be the best, to be on top? I mean,
yeah,
you were a collegiate athlete, that's a pretty
yeah,
big deal. But certainly looking at your athletic career now probably isn't the same now as
correct.
it was back in the day. But what comes to mind?
A big thing that we need to be careful of with this adventure is not tying it to our identity, to
Mm,
where that's who I am now as a football player. It was so weird.
mm,
These mental games that happen, and I'll just be very transparent. After I graduated college, you don't have the thrill of Saturday afternoon football anymore, because you're the man on campus. And then when you graduate, you're like, well, I'm not awesome anymore. And I can understand. And and then I started doing these weird mental games of like, well, I could take that guy if we ever played like one on one or whatever. And it's like, who cares about that? Like, what are you doing, man? Like, what are you thinking about? And it was all tying back to my identity of I didn't feel good enough in other areas. And so it was like, oh, I'm like tying this adventure, this football identity that I've developed over the years, and it's unhealthy and it's ugly
mm,
and it's weird and it's So we need to separate our identity from our adventure or the things that we're good at or feel like God has put in our hearts to seek after, whether you're, again, artist, outdoorsman, hiker, hunter, whatever.
Yeah.
You got to separate that from your identity. And it took a process of just like renouncing that and say, Lord, I'm a son of God. That's my identity. I'm a son of you.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a relationship with you. It's all based off of, your purpose for my life. And so separating that was a big step in my life. Now that I look back on it, I'm like, man, that was so much fun. I enjoyed it, whatever. But I'm so much more than just a wide receiver. So it
Right.
was it was that separation. But what about you? How does God fit into that desire, and how do you see that play out?
Well, nowadays, when I look at an adventure, it's much more for me about where's God at in it? Is God leading me to it? And then participating, in that and the process. I recognize the process so much more than I did before. And
Mm,
so if I don't win, if I don't succeed, at whatever this is, climbing, a mountain, harvesting an elk, whatever that is, it's okay because I recognize that it's the process that God's taking me through. It's not the trophy at the end. It's not the Super Bowl ring. It's what God doing through the process. Because the reality is very few people get a Super Bowl ring. Very few people get a trophy,
yeah,
right? So if we define success based off of the trophy, man, we're going to always, well,
yeah,
oftentimes fail. And
yeah.
if that's our perspective of success, and we're going to miss out on what God wants to speak to our heart. And so I invite individuals, onto these adventures and try to teach them to look for God in the aspects of the process
That's
and
good.
really look for them during the times of adversity,
Yeah.
when the struggle's real. Yeah, I was thinking back on a solo adventure I did a few years ago, 7 days in the middle of nowhere, almost 40 miles from civilization. It was just me, God, and, the skills that God had equipped me with, the talents and abilities and the education that I had given myself or others had given me or whatever. And there was part of me that just wanted to prove to myself that I could do it, but also know that, man, I'm going to need God, in this process to speak to my heart. I'm going to get lonely. I'm going to get scared. And man, it was just this beautiful process of God speaking to my heart, confirming that I have what it takes, not necessarily to be a successful solo adventurer, but He spoke to my heart and how it applies to my day to day life and how I engage, those around me. So when I talk about looking for God in the process, taking full stock of what God's doing. If we can't take out of an adventure an applicable lesson for our life, then we're probably wasting our time. And I feel like most men, most women are wasting the adventures that God has given them.
Mm,
And oftentimes it's because it lacks purpose. What is the purpose? You know?
yep. And that is the fulfillment side of it that is missing a lot of times from people. And without including Christ, without looking at the process and what I'm learning, without the growth, I think, as a part of the adventure, I think that's where the fulfillment is not there, is not as present, is when you're not including the Lord with that adventure. You're not learning from the process. Just like I learned, like my identity is wrapped up in this unhealthy way. Now I'm like, oh, okay, that's obviously something I need to figure out and fix. But that's
Mm-hmm.
where I think we need to remember, and I would encourage our listeners to consider, is am I gaining fulfillment? And if not, how can I incorporate the Lord in it to gain that fulfillment? And
Right.
ask him, what are you teaching me through this? What am I
Mm-hmm.
supposed to get out of this? So that way
Yeah.
it is fulfilling, because anything without the Lord is only going to be so good. It's only going to be so much that really is going to
Mm-hmm.
fill that need. But once you incorporate him, the fulfillment goes through the roof. Like it's night and day.
Right. If we recognize that God put that desire in our heart for a purpose and then we engage that purpose, invite him into it. It's incredible. I was thinking about Psalm 16:11. It says, "You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures, forevermore." And just, man, apart from Christ, we're not going to experience the things that we could and that we should, that he's given us the ability to. And so we invite him into this process, and it's beautiful.
And that's where I think some people also, they don't receive the fulfillment that they were thinking that this adventure was going to give them. And so they get frustrated, or they start looking at other different things, which could include drugs, alcohol, whatever, sex, etc., to fill this hole,
All
and it
right.
never will. And that's the hard part. And you see it in our culture, and it's hard because my heart breaks for those people that are trying to get fulfillment in these unhealthy ways. And it's like, if you just knew that your creator is waiting for you to connect with him, and
All
that
right.
would be is the fulfillment with these other adventures that is in life, but together with him, that's when it will be complete.
Like the adrenaline junkies. They're always on the edge, and we love to watch them. We love to celebrate them. But man, the fact is that they're pursuing this God-sized hole in all the wrong ways. They're living life on the edge. Sometimes sacrificing life and limb in their pursuit of finding this fulfillment. A lot of times, that fulfillment comes from validation of others seeing them what they can do. But and we need to re-engage, redefine our definition of
Yeah.
success, and
Yeah.
recognize that fulfillment only comes from Christ. Psalms 107:9 says, "For he satisfies the thirsty and fills the hungry with good things." And that's talking literally, but I believe he means it figuratively, as well. God wants to fulfill our desires. And if we don't give our desires to him, if we don't let him, if we don't invite him in, man, we'll just continue to lead this dissatisfied life. And that longing for more, will keep burning without over spiritualizing it, because you can't over spiritualize this, Eric. And I'm not at all poking you for this. This is the truth, that apart from a relationship with Jesus Christ on this side of eternity, you will never experience any element of lasting fulfillment, because you will not be free. You'll be a slave to that constant desire to be validated, to fill that hole, to experience things that make you feel alive. And they're all short lived apart from Christ.
For sure. So, Ben, what are some guidelines that we can give our listeners so that they can know that they're pursuing adventure in healthy, God ordained ways?
Yeah, well, life in Christ doesn't mean it's safe. It doesn't mean it's without risk. All right. Like I think of the Apostle Paul, I believe the greatest adventurer to ever walk planet Earth, but also one of the greatest believers apart from Christ. And I want to read to you a very short section of some of the affliction that, or adversity, that Paul faced. It's in 2 Corinthians 11:24. 5 times I withstood 39 lashes from Jewish authorities. 3 times I was battered with rods. Once I was almost stoned to death. 3 times I was shipwrecked. And I spent one day and one night adrift at the sea. And, that's only a portion of the adventures that he had traveling all over his area with a purpose of sharing the love of Christ. And so, Eric, to your question, when you talk about adventure, what is the purpose of it? Invite God into it. And, I believe that as a believer, our life are meant to love God, love others. And how can we help that process come through our adventures? How can we invite Jesus into, whether it's an adventure in sports or business or art or whatever it is, how can we invite Jesus into that to help us love him and love others more? But the reality is there's a lot of people that can't take part in sports, can't take part in big outdoor
Mm-hmm.
adventures. And
Yeah.
what's that look like? Well, it's defined by your world. Maybe it's a diet. Maybe it's an exercise commitment. Maybe it's some kind of cooking adventure or dance classes
Yeah.
or, whatever that
Yeah.
is. But man, God wants to speak through all of that.
And he gives us those desires to be around people that don't know him, so that way we can be a light in those different adventures, in those
Yeah.
different circles and the interest areas that we have. And I think just using those as guidelines. And some of those guidelines are, is this biblical? Is this healthy? Is this going to not hurt anybody or myself or any of my relationships? Some of those guidelines can really go a long way to just be like, okay, is this thing that I'm pursuing, is this healthy or not? And does it build up other people and connect you with other
Yeah.
people as well? And is the Lord a part of it all, to where you're praying before you're doing it, you're incorporating him, you're looking for ways of sharing, the good news to those that may not know him. All those are very healthy, constructive ways to get that fulfillment by being on mission. And that's, again, the ultimate adventure, is to be living with Christ, following Christ, and being on mission of sharing the gospel. That's the ultimate adventure. But
Yeah.
having your interest areas be an avenue in which you are doing that and incorporating him in.
Yeah.
Once I kind of caught the vision and the understanding of this, that's when I started to be like, okay, now I'm rolling. Now I'm getting fulfilled. Now I've got a purpose. Now I'm waking up in the morning
Mm-hmm.
with more
Mm-hmm.
intentionality. Now I'm excited to see what this day holds. Now I want, Lord, where are you leading me today? Who do you want me to talk to or pray for today? It just creates this momentum and excitement and joy of like, I'm here for a reason. I'm
Mm-hmm.
involved with this for a reason. And you just get pumped, and life has so much more fulfillment and meaning. I can't communicate it enough. So, but yeah,
That's good.
it's exciting. Well, any last thoughts or words, Ben, on the topic of adventure?
Ultimately, I believe the greatest adventure is our pursuit of Christ and his pursuit of us. And man, he has gifted us with the ability to enjoy life, enjoy so many things. He's gifted us with the ability to do things, and some of us are limited, with what that looks like. And I just want to encourage our listeners to live an adventurous life defined by Christ.
One more last thing before we wrap things up. When I was thinking about this podcast and adventure and all that, I pictured the time where he's just calling Peter to follow him, and he's like, I'm going to make you a fisher of men. And I was
Mm,
like, oh man, like that is such a cool adventure that he just called him on. Like, man, you're a fisherman, yeah, but I'm calling you to an adventure of fishing for men. And I'm like, man, that's awesome. So I think that's all of our call really, is to
yeah.
have that adventure and following him. And so, yeah, it may not be fishing because I can't stand fishing, but it may be something else that God uses in your life to call you. So,
Right. Love it, man.
all right. Well, we appreciate you guys listening. Thanks again. Please feel free to rate and review our podcast wherever you listen to this. Again, show notes has how you can connect with us, and take care and have a great day.